Welcome to our Grant Seeking Basics class. I'll be discussing resources to help both for-profit and nonprofit organizations to find the money they need to survive and prosper in these times. This program is being offered by the Newburgh Free Library. This is our homepage you're seeing now. Our address is newburghlibrary.org. We have various grant-related resources, of course, but we also have quite a wide range of other resources available for your use. So I would invite you to take a look at our website and see what else we have to offer. My name is Porter Barber. I'm the site coordinator for the Funding Information Network, about which more in a moment. I work at the Newburgh Library and have been here since 1988. And you can contact me at pbarber@rcls.org. Now, much of the information that we have on the site is also provided by an organization called Candid. As they like to say, Candid gets you the information you need to do good. Candid is an organization dedicated to increasing transparency in the field of philanthropy. It was formed by merger last year of Foundation Center and GuideStar, who have each been working for decades to do the same thing, to link foundations and nonprofits and individuals with the information and resources that they need to do good in the world. One of the things that Candid does is that they manage the Funding Information Network. The Funding Information Network is a network of libraries, foundations, and other nonprofit resource centers, largely around the U.S., but there are some over. For this class, my plan is to begin by discussing resources that are available for both nonprofit and for-profit organizations. Most of these resources are from the government. Then I'll discuss some additional resources available for business. Next, I'll move to resources for nonprofits, and I will finish up by talking about some additional resources at the Newburgh Library. But first, a shameless self-promotion. In the last month or so, the Newburgh Library has created a set of resource lists for various topics. One of them, of course, is grants. You can access these through our homepage, newburghlibrary.org. I have that open on the screen now. About a third of the way down the screen, you'll see a blue banner, and in the center of it, a drop-down menu labeled Research and Info. I have that open on the screen now, and if you look down that menu, you'll see that I've circled the entry for a resource list. So just click on that, and you will go to the page that has our set of resource lists. So this is our resource page, resource list right in the center. You can see we've got a variety of topics, and I've marked resources for finding grants. I've opened up our resource list for finding grants. The first page, as you can see, has to do with resources for nonprofits. The second page, as you can see here, includes government grants and resources for business. So you can see there's quite a lot of resources for your organization, whether you're a profit or nonprofit. And I do want to point out that this is a downloadable list, so you can download it straight to your computer, and you'll have access to all of the links included in the document. This is our resource page again, and I just wanted to go back here for a moment to show you that we also have a small business resource section, as well as several other categories. So the first thing now that I want to do is discuss some resources that are useful for both business and nonprofits. These are mostly government programs. Now, there are many different government agencies that run resource programs of various types and offer both grants and or loans. You could go directly to their pages, and sometimes that's a good idea. However, both the federal government and New York State have created portals which provide access to all of their grant and loan programs. Not surprisingly, the federal government has provided two. So they say that their official site is beta.sam.gov. And you can go there and find tools to manage your relationship to federal government grant and loan programs, no matter whether you're a donor, recipient, or what exactly your relationship is. One part of beta.sam.gov is what they call assistance listings. Assistance listings is where you'd actually go to try to look up grant programs that may be able to help your organization, whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit business. If you've dealt with federal government grant and loan programs in previous years or decades, you're probably familiar with the Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance, and all that information has been folded into the beta.sam.gov site, and specifically assistance listings. In fact, they still use the code numbers from the Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance, and so you may run into CFDA numbers while you're doing your research there. But the government is trying to get in step with the times, and so they've also provided something that's intended to be more user-friendly, consumer-oriented site for looking up grants and loans, and that's called grants.gov. New York has done something similar, setting up the New York State Grants Gateway. Now I've got their very long address for the Grants Gateway on the screen there, but I do want to remind you that all of these links are available in our list of grants resources, which can be downloaded from our website. This is the beta.sam.gov website. You'll notice there's a search box up in the top of the drop-down menu where you can specify the kind of information you need to get, whether it has to do with possible grants or other information about government agencies and programs. I've opened up the drop-down menu here so that you can see where the assistance listings appear. I've opened up the assistance listings page here so you can see what it looks like. There is a search box on the left side where you can look for information generally about the assistance listings. But what I want to focus on are the two items that I've circled on the right. One is the public quick start guide, so if you need guidance to using the assistance listing system, you can open that up and read it. They also have their assistance listing search tool there. So you just click where it says search assistance listings, and it will take you to the page where you can begin to search for possible grant options. This is the search page, of course, and it initially shows you all 2,263 programs. But over on the left, there's a keyword search box. Now I have put a little blue oval around the search box just so you can see that. You'll notice there's some other filters below it though for things like the published date, and there are a few other things. I've gone ahead and entered the search terms of coronavirus wages. So if you wanted to find federal programs to assist you with paying the wages of your employees during this coronavirus pandemic, you can just plug that into the keyword box. So when you search for coronavirus wages, this is what you get. You'll notice the keyword box still has your search terms on the left. You can clear those out by clicking the little X and enter something else if you want to. But they're showing us that there are 38 results pertaining to that search terms, and we see the first one here, coronavirus relief, pandemic relief for aviation workers. We can see another one below that. And over on the right you can see the CFDA number, as I mentioned. Although the Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance has been superseded by this assistance listings, they're still using the CFDA numbers in their organization scheme. And it tells you that this is funded currently, an extremely important detail to know, and the last date when this listing was updated. One other thing I wanted to point out here is that below the title of the program you'll see that it also tells you what department this comes from, in this case the Treasury Department. So I clicked on the title and that takes me to the listing, the detailed listing for this specific program. And as you can see, this is at the Department of the Treasury. Their seal is showing. Over on the left, I've put a red box around what you might call the table of contents for this particular listing. I've got a blue arrow next to the word overview just to point out to you that that also is what appears at the bottom of the screen. So this page is much longer than what I could include in the slide here. It's all this information is in one view, and you just scroll down to get to it. But you can see that under this introductory material at the top, you get to the overview, and then the other sections listed there on the left will follow in order. I have also put a blue oval around a link that says View Available Opportunities on grants.gov. I mentioned grants.gov. So you could click that to get to the grants.gov view of this program. And here is grants.gov. As the name indicates, that's their address, grants.gov. I've marked a few things on the page that I want to point out. Just below the name of the page is a box around a heading that says Learn Grants. So this would connect you to their page that gives you their introduction to how the whole system works. So you might want to look there first when you come to grants.gov and see how to navigate around the site. I also wanted to point out that I mentioned earlier this is their consumer-friendly site, and so they have an app for this that you can download to your phone. Go to the App Store or to Google Play and you can download the app for grants.gov. And then finally in the lower left I've circled Search Grants. So that's where you go to actually see what they've got available. So I'm sorry I can't show you what the app looks like, so instead I've taken you to the search page for grants.gov as it looks on a computer. Over on the left side you have a search box. You can search by keyword, opportunity number, or CFDA number. The opportunity number is the ID number, and if you look in the column to the right, you'll see each grants program has an opportunity number there. So if you knew the opportunity number or CFDA number, perhaps from the assistance listings or some other source, you could plug it in there in the search box and go right to that program. Down below, there's several filters. You can search by opportunity status, which basically means whether this is a future program or a current one. It's forecast or posted, or even an old program that's already closed, so you could look back to find out programs that had already passed their time. You can search by instrument type, that is to say cooperative agreements, grants, or other things. You can search by eligibility, because some grants are only available for particular kinds of entities like a local government or a non-profit or a for-profit, and you can select your category of organization in the eligibility listing there, and there's a few other types of filters that you can use. So what I've done here is to plug the term homeless shelters into the keyword search box, and you can see the results. They found 74 matching results. So in each case they give you the opportunity number, they give you the program title, they give you the agency and opportunity status, which as we mentioned could be forecasted, posted, closed, or archived. They give you the posted date, and then finally the closed date, which you'll need to know so that you can get your application in on time. So I clicked on the first program that was listed there, the Basic Center program, and so that brings us to the detailed page for this program. And we can see the opportunity number and the name and the departments related to it. And then you'll see there are 4 icons in the red oval there. The synopsis is open right now, so we get a summary of information about this particular program. But there are some other options there. You can go to the version history, which will see previous versions of the program. Sometimes programs will have related documentation attached to the file, and that's available. And then the package finally includes things like application forms. So if you want to apply for this, you click on Package. Now if we scroll down the screen, we get to additional information, and I'm pointing this out because in addition to having a fairly good terse description of the program, they have links to additional information, which I've marked here. And so that address would take you to the page at the agency where this program is described. There's also a link and address for the help desk if you have problems or questions as you're applying for this program. Now, if you follow that link to the agency, this is what you get. The page at Administration for Children and Families, the Grants and Funding section that describes the Basic Center program in detail and has downloadable PDF on the right with all the details about that. As I mentioned back when we first looked at grants.gov, they have a page called their Grants Learning Center where they'll give you information about how their whole grant system works and how to navigate their sites, and that's what we're seeing here. You'll notice they have a Grants 101, sort of introduction to the whole system, and various sections for policies and eligibility and other things. Having said that portals offer the best approach, the best access to the federal programs, it can still be useful to look at the pages for specific agencies that describe the range of programs that they have available. For example, Small Business Administration has programs related to COVID-19. For supporting businesses, they have their Paycheck Protection Program and Small Business Administration loan forgiveness and so forth. And sometimes you get a better sense of the overall range of the programs by looking there at the agency. So for example, the address for the Small Business Paycheck Protection Program is at coronavirus.gov. There's an entire site of coronavirus-related government programs there. So if you go to coronavirus.gov/smallbusiness, you can see what the SBA has to do, and some other agencies, in supporting business during the coronavirus pandemic. Or you could go to the Small Business Administration's SBIR page. That's their Small Business Innovation Research page. If you're doing R&D work, for example, they may have programs that would help you there. You note that at the top they do have their SBA guidance for businesses impacted by coronavirus. Or you could go to the EPA, and they have a page for their specific grants programs. Over on the left is their guide to the page, which I've put in a little blue rectangle. So you can see their home page or how to apply or where to find the forms. I did point out with a little blue arrow that even the agency itself is pointing you back to the beta.sam.gov page, because you'll need to go there to complete the process here. But you can take the information from the EPA page and go back to beta.sam.gov and plug it in there to get full information and to apply for the grants. Now at the New York State level, they have their own one-stop shop, which is that New York Grants Gateway, and here's the address. Remember, all these addresses are in our grants resource list. This is the New York State Grants Gateway, and they have various information here about telephone numbers or hours of operation. Down at the bottom, you'll see features to browse or search or receive notifications and to register if you're going to be a vendor. And you can click down there to actually go to those areas. I've taken us here to the search for opportunities, and you'll notice various search boxes. Now, one thing they don't have in the Grants Opportunity portal here is any kind of a keyword search. So you can search by grant opportunity, due date, status, eligibility. We'll look at some of those in detail. So for example, I've marked and I've opened up the menu for search by status, and so what they mean there is the status of the grant program. And so You have anticipated programs, you have actual available programs, or programs that have already closed, and you can search the system looking for any of those, or you can look for all programs. Now, they also have what they call search by funding agency. I've opened that and circled it here, in which you'd indicate nonprofit or for-profit or government entity, tribal organization. So various programs are only available to people or organizations in different categories. There's a search by service area. Since they don't have a keyword search for their grants, this is the closest you come to identifying the subject area, or in this case, more of a work area where your organization is active. And so, as you can see, you can search for things in the Health and Human Services area, or workforce development, or agricultural supports, or so forth. So this is what the results page looks like if you run a search. And I've circled grant opportunity at the top just so I could say a word about that. So the grant opportunity is the name for the grant program. If you already knew the name for a program, you could go to the search page and plug that in the grant opportunity box, and it would take you directly to that program. Now, if we run a search like this, then we get a series of responses, and in the left-hand column they'll tell you the funding agency, and then the grant opportunity. They'll tell you the status of the program. They'll tell you who's eligible to apply for it and when it becomes available. The critical box, I suppose, is the last one on the far right, the due date. So this tells you when you need to get your application in. And if we look at this, we'll notice though that some of the programs listed here have due dates that were well in the past. Back on the search page, it was possible to specify the time range that you wanted to search. If you don't do that, which I didn't, then you'll get a whole list of grants here, some of which may well be expired. And so if you look about 3/4 of the way down, you'll see one called the Open Access Centers RFA. And if you look at the due date on the far right, you'll see it was October 31st, 2017. So both past and present programs are listed here, and you need to be aware of that. So if I clicked on a particular program, then it takes you to a detail screen for that. And so this is a grant opportunity for child passenger safety grants for 2021, and you've got the contact name and the email and a description of it. Over on the right, you have full announcement details. Down at the very bottom, you'll notice I put a red arrow next to View Grant Opportunity, so you can click that and go to the details for this particular program. Now that's how the grants gateway for New York State works. I do want you to be aware that the New York State Assembly also has its own publication. Now this is not a portal to access grants, but if you want to keep up on what kind of grant programs the New York State government has created or is creating, you can go to their Grants Action News, and I've included their address here. It's just nyassembly.gov/GAN/. So you can go here and see their updated announcements of new programs that they're creating. It's not just the federal and state governments that publish information about grants. Orange County also does its part by compiling a list of grant sources and publishing it on their webpage. Their address is orangecountygov.com/329/grants. So they've got a list here of resources that are particularly relevant to people who are working here in Orange County. Okay, now there are other organizations and business-related periodicals that have compiled lists of grant and loan resources. Some of them are COVID-19 related and some are not. So rather than just reinvent the wheel, I just want to show you some of the best that we've seen. Grantwatch.com publishes a list of business grants, and they have a searchable grant database on their site. They list 785 small business grants. Now, um, they are looking nationwide or even beyond the nation. As you can see, there's a grant for Ontario individuals. But they do have search features that allow you to specify the geographic area, so you can specify that you want something in New York. One of the things Candid has done is to create their Candid Learning platform, which provides a wide variety of information regarding fundraising and nonprofit management generally. If you've used Candid or Foundation Center in the past, you may have been familiar with their grantspace.org. Candid Learning is the successor to grantspace.org, and they've migrated all of the information from grantspace.org to Candid Learning. With the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, Candid has created a very rich resource list regarding emergency financial resources for all sorts of organizations during this pandemic. Candid is designed to support nonprofits, but with the COVID-19 pandemic, it became clear that small businesses were going to need a lot of assistance also. And so when they put together their list of emergency financial resources, they included a section for small business. I've put a red box around the table of contents for the document just so you could see the kind of categories they were using, and you'll note that grants for small businesses is one of the things that they deal with in this document. Another good source is the 2020 Ultimate List of U.S. Small Business Grants put out by Bench.co. And Bench.co is an accounting firm, but they've done a good job here of finding useful grants. There's a table of contents over on the left. I've put a box around it so you can identify it, and you can see what kind of things are covered in this particular document. I also like Idea Cafe. Now, Idea Cafe provides an enormous amount of information for small business, and you can see that if you look over on the right side where I've circled their table of contents for their site. They've got their grant center, they've got information on starting a business, they've got information about running a business and doing marketing or handling HR or legal problems and so forth. So I recommend going to Idea Cafe for information. But they also provide grants. So over on the left side here, you see I've put a box around the heading for Small Biz Grant Center. They have their grants du jour, and they also have a compilation of government grants. You could click on those links down below. I've put a blue oval around their past grants so you can see what they've actually given out in the past. Digital.com also put out earlier this year a list of 30 plus small business grants they recommend in 2020, and I found that very useful list. And I especially want to encourage people to check out Hello Alice. Hello Alice is an organization or business that supports small business, and they provide a variety of kinds of resources for small businesses, both informational and grants related. You notice they do have a COVID-19 Business Resource Center, so you can go to Hello Alice and get help with all sorts of business problems, and at the moment you can go get a list of resources to help you in the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, now here are the addresses for the previous sites. I do want to remind you though, these are all in our resource list. And basically, you can find these by going to the home web page for the organization, which pretty much matches the name of the organization in most cases. So GrantWatch has their resources at grantwatch.com. GrantSpace has their COVID-19 emergency financial resources at grantspace.org. Bench.co. For Idea Cafe, the actual address is businessownersideacafe.com. Digital.com and HelloAlice.com, as I said, are also excellent resources. Now, I want to move on to resources specifically for nonprofits. Because of our relationship with Candid, The Newburgh Library can offer access to their Foundation Directory Online Essentials database. It's a very powerful tool which I'll look at in some detail in a few minutes. But Candid provides several other services too. A little while ago we saw a document from Candid Learning, so I thought I should show you their website. So this is Candid Learning website. Their address is learning.candid.org. That's at the top of the screen. They provide access to a wide variety of resources here, and so over on the right I have put a bubble around the tabs that allow us access to search for different kinds of training. In order to give you a better view of the kind of resources that are available from Candid Learning, I decided I would walk you through these tabs over on the right side, and I've opened up the training tab to begin with. And the first thing you'll notice is that on the left side of the drop-down menu, they have live trainings. They provide live online trainings, and in normal times they provide live training on site at their centers, which are listed below there. And they have centers in New York. That's the original Foundation Center location. Also in Washington, D.C., Cleveland, Atlanta, and the San Francisco area. For the duration of COVID-19, on-site training has been suspended at their centers, but they're still doing live online training, and they have a calendar which will show you when those are occurring. But they also have on-demand training. They have self-paced learning courses, videos, and podcasts that you can access at any time. They have their knowledge base there, which is a collection of documents. So there's a lot of material that you can see whenever you want to. They also have custom group training. So they'll deliver training to your staff. You can just contact them to arrange that. And at the current time, of course, they're doing all of that online. But in normal times, they will send their staff to your location to train your staff. If you prefer, you can look at Candid's resources in terms of the topics that you can study about, rather than the modes of training which are available to you. So in their topics drop down, you see the major categories such as fundraising, proposal writing, management, and governance. And I do want to point out here that although Candid provides an enormous amount of information about particular financial opportunities and grants that are available, they also have a lot of resources related to nonprofit management. That is a major emphasis of theirs. And then if you scroll down through this list, you'll note that there is an option to browse all topics. We can also look at this in terms of the type of resources they provide, or perhaps we would say the format of the information. So they have a blog where you can find useful information. They have a knowledge base, which is a collection of articles about different aspects of fundraising and nonprofit management. They have sample documents like actual grant proposals or plans. They have a special collection of nonprofit startup resources. You can borrow ebooks. They have the Foundation Directory Online, which is their flagship database of grant makers and actual grants, which we'll see. They have the Collaboration Hub, where you have tools that allow people to work together on projects, and then there are other materials related to their goal of providing transparency to the nonprofit field. If you click on the word training in that training tab at the top, then it brings you here to Candid Learning's search training screen. You'll note that they have the normal keyword search to allow you to access their trainings, but there are also some other options in the boxes below that I've circled. Format distinguishes between live online trainings. Remember that currently all training is online, versus recorded online training, whether that is blog, video, or one of their self-paced online courses. Topic lets you select the major subject category you're interested in, and experience level allows you to specify whether you are a beginning user or an intermediate or experienced user of their training resources. I'd also like to point out that on the lower right there's a chat box. You can always chat with one of their professional staff for assistance in using their website. To demonstrate their search feature, I've run a search here specifying that I'm looking for on-demand trainings regarding fundraising, and I want to look at the results in all experience levels. So this is the result that you get. I've put a little blue arrow next to the line where it shows there are 143 results that match our criteria, and you see the first couple of them below that. But I also have circled the boxes in the center of the screen that allow you to sort out this material depending on whether it's self-paced learning, it's part of their knowledge base of documents, a video or podcast. You note they have Spanish materials, and that you can also select for free trainings. Very many of their trainings are free, but not everything is. I elected to look at their self-paced learning options, and so I clicked that button. Now we see that there are 9 results for on-demand fundraising and self-paced learning. The first one that comes up is making the case, how to position research in your proposal. And you'll see it's $25, so it's not one of their free items. Here I've scrolled down the list to see some of the other self-paced options, and I just wanted to point out that they have some free items in their self-paced learning section. And so we see their introduction to finding grants, an introduction to proposal writing, and one of their Spanish options, well, that's the introduction to proposal writing in Spanish. This is the screen for their knowledge base. You can search this by keyword or by topic. I didn't in this case, I just wanted to see everything. And so you'll note that they have 242 different documents in their knowledge base. I just wanted to show you their sample document page. I've circled the categories they have available: cover letters, letters of inquiry, letter proposals, proposal budgets, and full proposals. And I want to be clear that these are actual documents used by real organizations, and they've been examined and vetted by the professional staff at Candid Learning to provide you high quality examples of each of these categories of material. Candid also has an ebook collection. All you have to do is complete a short registration process and you can start borrowing books for free. Their collection has a wide variety of topics, from current social issues to business management and nonprofit management to fundraising. If you look at the display here, you'll see that some of the books are audiobooks, so if you prefer to listen to your books, you can do that, and some of them are ebooks in text form. They also have a search feature, so you can find exactly what you need. Candid also has a YouTube channel. Now, I got here by searching for Candid Philanthropy, but you could search for Candid Grants and that would work just as well. And so here we are. We see their icon, the yellow circle with the big letter C in the center. And over to the right, you'll note that they have 553 videos in their collection. So Candid has a large collection of instructional videos running the gamut from grant writing to nonprofit board management to wider issues of philanthropy. Some of these are quite short, like just below their icon you can see where it says "We are Candid." They have a 41-second video about the merger of Foundation Center and GuideStar that I mentioned earlier. Other videos, like the one below that, the Foundation Directory Online, which is an introduction to their database, may be about an hour. But sometimes you'll see longer videos covering conferences, for example, that might take several hours. So there's a whole range of videos that should have the level of detail you need. Now, their chief online resource is their Foundation Directory Online. The Newburgh Library has access to that because we're part of the Candid Funding Information Network. To get to that, you go back to our homepage, which we've done here. I clicked on the Research and Info button here, which took us to the Research and Info page. And then I've opened up that drop-down menu. This is the same drop-down menu where we have resource lists and a lot of other useful things, but I've encircled the line for the link to the research databases. Click that, and you come to our database page. Now if we scroll down the page, we would see an alphabetical list of all the databases, but we've got tabs at the top that organize it by subject area, and there's a grants area which I've marked here. If you click the grants link, it'll bring you to this page where you see our grants databases. And if you look closely, you'll notice there are three. Foundation Directory Online Essential, which I have circled up here in red. Foundation Grants to Individuals Online, and Foundation Directory Online Professional. So in normal times, we provide access to the second and third database on site at the library. Because we can't do that during the coronavirus pandemic, Candid has graciously allowed us and their other funding information network libraries to make Foundation Directory Online Essential available remotely to our patrons. Foundation Directory Online Essential gives you access to about 103,000 grant maker profiles, so it's a pretty large database. So the way this generally works is that Candid has a tiered structure for access to their database. The more you pay, the more access you get. So what that means is that the Foundation Directory Online Professional is a bigger database than the Online Essential that we're allowed to provide access to now. So if you're not finding enough information in the Online Essential database, I recommend that once the library reopens, which we hope will not be too long in the future, then you can come in and search the bigger database and you may find additional information. There are also a few features in the larger database that we don't have access to, but all the same, a database of 103,000 grant makers is pretty good. This is the landing page for Foundation Directory Online Essential. You may hear me refer to this as FDO Essential at times. In the upper right, I've circled several icons that you can use. One thing I want to point out is that because you're accessing this through our webpage, you are signing in under our credentials. So it says, "Hi, Newburgh Free Library." That little caret there has a drop-down menu that has a logout feature, and I would recommend that when you finish searching, you click to log out there. There is a help screen that gives you a lot of information, and if you notice the chat icon, most of the time when you're using the database, they have people online to chat with you. So if you need assistance while you're doing your research, you can speak to one of their professionals who can help you navigate the database. In the center of the screen is their search box. I've outlined it in red. And I went ahead and plugged in the term Food Pantries New York to run a search on that. This is what the search results screen looks like. I've put a little blue arrow next to showing results for food banks, nutrition, program support, New York, United States. Down below in red, I've encircled icons that give you access to the actual material that they found in the search. But I wanted to point out something about the results here. If you notice, those terms there, food banks, nutrition, etc., are not the terms that I typed into the search box. You can still see those below in the search box, where I typed in food pantries in New York. So this highlights a very important aspect of this database, which is that when you search for topics in the database, they're not actually searching their records for the particular words that you use. Instead, what's actually happening is that they match up whatever you type in the search box with the terminology that they use to organize the information in their database. So the FDO Essential database looked at food pantries New York and decided that that was best represented in their database by food banks, nutrition, program support, and New York. And so that's what they actually searched in their database. Now down below you'll see 4 icons in that red oval. The one on the left, blue, is 747 grant makers. So that is how many grant makers they've located that correspond to those terms that they searched. On the far right, you'll see 13,167 990 tax forms. So their database here is based essentially on records of grants. So when you search for something, you're finding people who have given grants that match your criteria in the past. And the actual 980s are here, so if you want to look at them yourselves and see the details about the firm's or the foundation's finances as well as what they actually funded, you can do that. But that information has already been used to identify the grant makers that they're going to pull up when you run a search. Now you notice there are a couple of grayed out icons, one for grants and one for recipients. As I mentioned, some of the features that are available in the full database are not available in the essential database. And that includes grants and recipients. So when the library is open again and you're able to come in, if you use the full database, you would actually be able to see the specific grants that correspond to your criteria, and you'd be able to see profiles for the recipient organizations, and those can be very useful. But right now you still have access to the list of the grant makers. I also wanted to point out that there are more ways to search than you first see when you look at the search box here. So I put a little red arrow down to the edit mark. We've got that list of the terms they use when they run their search: food banks, nutrition, etc. Now if you click edit, you can change that, so you can change what they're searching for. Or you can click advanced search and filters, which I've marked with the blue arrow. Either way, you get to the next page. If you do click on edit or advanced search and filters, then it takes you behind the scenes, so to speak, where you can see the inner workings of their search mechanism. And so what you see is this screen where you have a subject area box, a geographic focus box, and a population served box. And these are the main search boxes that you'll want to use for most of your research. Now they do also have an organization name box below, and location and who's who. So subject area is, as we would expect, the topic we're looking for. Geographic focus, though, requires a little bit of explanation. I picked New York. Now, you could have plugged Newburgh into that. But the thing to remember is that the entire database is built out of their records of grants that have actually been given. So if we put Newburgh in there, it will only show us grant makers who've actually given grants in Newburgh in the past. And that would be too constrictive most of the time. It would rule out a lot of people who might be willing to give grants in Newburgh but haven't yet. So it's probably better, and this is the advice that the Foundation Directory people give us, it's probably better to just put your state name in the geographic focus. And then you'll get everyone who's been working in New York. And you can try to narrow it down later if you have too many responses, but most likely you'll get the best response by picking the state there. Now the lower three boxes, a couple of them are very specific. You can use organization name if you know a specific grant maker that you want to find. Or you could use the who's who box if you know the name of someone that you know works in a foundation somewhere, but you're not sure what foundation, and you want to make a personal contact, then you could search for that person. The location box here refers to the location where either the grant maker or a recipient organization is located, that is where they're headquartered. So the geographic focus box has to do with where the money is going to be spent. The location is where the grant maker actually is, but you might find a grant maker based in California who's giving money for work in New York. And so you wouldn't narrow yourself down to California in the location box. I previously had said that when you type something in one of these search boxes, you're trying to match up your search term, whatever you call your topic, or geography or population with the terminology that the database uses. And if you start typing in the box, they'll actually start showing you possible matches in the space underneath the box. And you can see if one of them matches what you want. But there is another way to do this. If you just click in the box, which is what I did here, then it'll open up a whole list of the subject categories that they use. So I click in the subject area box and I get this list that's opened up there. And you'll notice that next to the topic listed there, like arts and culture or agriculture, fishing and forestry, there's a little caret, and I've circled the one next to arts and culture. That indicates that arts and culture is an upper level subject, and there are actually subtopics underneath that. If I clicked on that caret, then it would open up arts and culture and we'd see what all the categories were that pertain to that, and then we could choose the ones we want and do our search. What I did next was to click on additional filters, and you see I've got a red arrow pointing to that icon. And this opens up a whole other set of search boxes. These are for very specialized uses typically, and probably most of the time you can ignore them, but if you need the particular features they give, they can be very helpful. So you have a box for support strategy, for transaction type, organization type. There are a couple of sliders. You just move the little gray button up or down those lines. There's one for grant amount and one for years. There's a keyword box and an EIN box, which is an organization identification number. Support strategy, you'll notice, already has the term program support in it. Even though we couldn't see it earlier, that is one of those search terms that shows up at the top of the screen where it says showing results for. So program support generally pertains to you might think of it as the aspect of the nonprofit that's being supported, whether it's program support, leadership education and training, general support. That would show up in that box. Transaction type has to do with the nature of the resources that are being handed over from the grant maker to the recipient organization. So you get kind of unusual things. I mean, it could be cash grants, but this is also where you'd find things like in-kind gifts or pro bono services. So if what you need is something a bit unusual and not just money, you could fill that in the transaction type box. Organization type has to do with the type of organization, whether it's a foundation or public foundation or religious organization or something. Either the organization that's giving money or receiving it. The grant amount allows you to select the size of the grants you're interested in, and the years slider there just lets you specify what range of time you want to look at. It may be, and you'll notice the slider goes back to 2003, but it may be you only want to know about the grants that have been given out in the last 5 years, and so you could just push that on up to 2015, and then the database would only show you grant makers based on the last 5 years of grants. Keyword. Now, I'd mentioned earlier that keyword is not really how they do things. We'll see as we go along that the grantmaker profiles have a lot of information, but it's kind of encoded in the specific terms that the database likes to use, and they don't have a lot of keywords attached to the names of particular grant makers, and that means that if you stick your own keyword in, it's not one of their chosen terms, then you may be excluding a lot of grant makers. So I would recommend only using keyword search in a couple of circumstances. Now, one would be if your initial search gives you an enormous number of responses and you need to narrow that down. You could try keyword then. Or if you're looking for something really unusual that's not going to turn up as one of their categories in the database, then you could try doing it in keyword. But if the keyword search doesn't work, I would not assume that means there are no organizations out there that are willing to fund your project. Now I'm bringing this screen back up, which we've actually seen before. This is the initial results screen, and the reason I'm doing this is because I want to take a look in more detail at what it gives you pertaining to those 747 grant makers. So if you scroll down the screen, this is what you'll see. There's a section for grant makers and one for 990 tax forms. So initially they show you the first 5 grant makers that they have found in the search. And this is organized in terms of the grant count. So briefly, what we have here is the name of the organization, the city it's located in, and the state and the country, total assets of the organization, total giving, amount funded, and grant count, and that's the key here. So they sort out this information in terms of who gave the most grants. So we see that Bank of America Charitable Foundation has given out 258 grants, and so they're at the top of the list, and then we start counting down. Down below that, of course, you see that 990 tax forms organized basically by most recent year that they have in the database for the organizations that are in that grant maker list. Here I've isolated 2 particular categories in their display. So one is total giving and one is amount funded, and I want to distinguish between them. Total giving refers to the amount of giving that a particular organization engaged in the time period. So the Bank of America Charitable Foundation has given $169 million in all of its grant programs. Amount funded tells you how much they gave that matches your search criteria. So they gave $2,446,000 roughly to these type of programs in New York. And sometimes you'll see something like the difference between Bank of America and General Mills Foundation. So Bank of America gave away $169 million. General Mills only gave away $21 million. But Bank of America's amount funded is $2.4 million and is a tiny proportion of their total giving. General Mills funded almost $2 million. That corresponds to your search criteria. And that's almost 10% of their giving. So you can see that for the 2 organizations, giving to food banks and similar projects is much more important for General Mills Foundation than it is for Bank of America. And that's something you might want to take into account. Even though they've got fewer resources, they have much more of an interest in the area that you're interested in and that you're researching. Underneath the list of the 5 top grant makers, you'll see there's a View All button. And if you click that, then it'll take you to the full list of the grant makers. Likewise, you see the 990 forms and you have access to them. Now here I clicked grant makers, and this is what you get. So it takes you to a page where you have a few additional search features actually, and then they begin the full list of all the grant makers that they've located. So I need to say something about the grant makers filters here. Again, some of these are features that you don't have in the Foundation Directory Online Essentials, but you would have in the larger database. The past funders filter, actually this one depends on your organization having an account with Candid. And if you do, then you can limit this so it just shows you the particular grant makers who have previously given to your organization. So you might want to do that at times. You'll notice there's a box that says exclude grant makers not accepting applications. I actually recommend not checking that. Now there are a number of grant makers who are small organizations who don't have the staff generally to handle large numbers of applications, and will say that they only fund people by invitation. Even though that's true, that doesn't necessarily mean you can't get any assistance from them. So what we recommend in those cases is that if you find a grant maker who says they're not accepting applications, then you see if you can make a personal contact with that organization. If you can find some personal introduction to them, you might be able to convince them that you should be one of the organizations that they invite to put in a grant proposal. And so we don't recommend excluding all grant makers that don't accept applications here. Now you can also use the sliders to the right to indicate assets. You can determine whether the database shows you only grant makers with a certain range of assets, or likewise you could exclude or select grant makers who give within a certain range. And down below you see the beginning of the grant makers list. Now I've scrolled on down the screen a bit to the TD Charitable Foundation just to use them as an example. And you see their statistics. They're from Portland, Maine, and they gave a little under a little under $700,000 that matches your criteria, and gave 55 grants. If you move the mouse so that the cursor hovers over the name of the grant maker, then it opens up a pop-up box that looks like this. So for TD Charitable, what it tells you is their total assets, their total giving, tells you what their top subjects are: human services, community and economic development, and so forth. It gives you their website, and it gives you some news about them. Remember, one thing that Candid does, in addition to running their database, is they publish various periodicals that publish information about the general field of philanthropy, and so you may have news accounts in some of their publications about the TD Charitable Foundation, and they'll give you links here. Now, if we click on the name of the particular grant maker we're interested in, then it takes you to a screen like this. Now, this is just the top of the screen. We'll scroll down and see more of it later. But at the top, they give you essentially a graphical look at what this foundation has been doing. So besides their name and location and their URL, they show you what they're funding. They show you where the money's going and how big the grants are. So in that graph on the left, you can see the major categories of funding. Now, it's hard to see in this display, but the bottom axis of that gives amounts. And so you can see how much is being funded there and how much they're giving to each area. In the center, you have a map of the United States that will show you which states are getting the most money from TD Charitable Foundation. And as you can see, New York is one of the ones that gets the most. And on the right, you can see the number of grants. So there, the lower axis is amounts of grants in $5,000 increments, basically. And the axis on the left, the vertical axis, is the number of grants. So you can see at a glance they gave a little over 1,500 grants between $5,000 and $10,000, and looks like probably about 8,000, maybe a little more than that actually, grants below $5,000. So if we scroll down in the TD Charitable profile, we get to this point. And over on the left, you've got the guide to their entire profile, and you can click on those. The headings there are links, so you can go to the particular section of their profile indicated there. So we're in the funding interest section, and you can see they have several broad categories, and they'll tell you what kinds of subjects they're interested in, where they're working, population groups they work with, their support strategies that they fund, and transaction types and organization types. There's a related organizations section, and in this case there's nothing there, which indicates something you need to know about the database, which is that they don't have the same amount of information about every organization. So depending on just how much they have about a given grant maker, they'll have more or less in the profile. So we don't have related organizations. We do have a little bit on their purpose and activities. Down below, there are some other funders to consider who do similar things, and you might want to look at them. Now, there's a section for applications and requests for proposal. This particular organization is very detailed in the requirements that they lay out for making an application for funding. But this can vary a lot from one organization to another. Sometimes you'll see there's just a single sentence that'll say something like, call before sending in an application. So this is quite variable depending on the particular grant maker. A little further down in this section, there's giving limitations, and I do urge paying close attention to this. This is where they'll tell you just who they won't fund. It'll tell you what geographic areas typically that they'll work in, and it'll tell you, for example, in this case, that they don't support private foundations or lobbying or advocacy groups or veterans groups or religious organizations. So I do recommend paying attention to the giving limitations. Those should be taken seriously, and if a grant maker says they don't give to your kind of organization, then it's probably best not to waste your time and their time. Further down, we see some financial information about the organization. Who's who? Of course, the information in this can vary depending on how forthcoming the grant maker is, but in general, they'll provide, the database will provide, a list of the chief officers of the foundation, board of directors and things like presidents and things like that. Earlier I said that we don't recommend selecting that checkbox that would exclude every organization that doesn't accept applications. And essentially this is why. Because the database can give you names of people at the organization, and so you can use these as points of contact. You can talk to all of your constituents and see if any of them know any of the people who work for a given funder. And if they can make a personal contact, they can introduce you to the people at the grant maker, then you may be able to get your feet in the door, even though they say that they're not accepting applications. Now, I don't believe any of the names listed here have it, but many of the profiles here will include LinkedIn profiles for the people in the Who's Who section. That is to say, if people are in Who's Who have LinkedIn profiles, it'll tell you and give you a link to it. So if you or your constituents have profiles in LinkedIn, then you can use that also as a point of contact to introduce yourself to people at the charitable organization that you're interested in. Now, when you have a chance to access the larger database on site at the Newburgh Library, this also opens up some other possibilities for networking, because there, one of the things you have access to is the names of actual recipient organizations who've received funding from particular grant makers. So you could see who's received funding from the TD Charitable Foundation in this case. And if you knew anyone at one of those recipient foundations, then they might be able to connect you with TD Charitable, and so another way you can get your foot in the door. So you need to be looking for ways to network with people at grant makers so you can get them interested in supporting your organization. Now, the profile also has news about the organization and online communications. Typically, if an organization has a social media presence, that will show up in this section, and so you can find out about them, possibly contact them there too. And finally, at the end, you have contact information for TD Charitable Foundation, including their EIN number and their location and telephone numbers and so forth. And I just included this to remind you that the 990s of foundations are included in the database here. So if you do want to dig into those, like this is a 990 PF for a private foundation. But you can see the whole 990 here. You can see what their financial assets are, and you can see what the actual grants are that they have given in the time period covered by this. And you can see all of their 990s for many previous years. Now, there are other resources for nonprofits beyond the database. One of them, of course, is that GrantSpace list of resources for COVID-19 relief, and we've already seen. Since we're looking at resources for nonprofits now, I thought I'd just go back for a moment to the Candid Learning resource list for COVID-19 related needs and point out in the table of contents there that they do have a section of grants for nonprofits. And this actually is the beginning of the section for nonprofits. You can see the kind of things that they point out to you. So they have a section on raising funds in the COVID-19 era. They have a map that'll let you find your state association of nonprofits. They have information on the CARES Act and other particular programs. So they actually have quite a lot of information here. Candid also has a page on their website for funds for coronavirus relief, and it's searchable. You can search by geography as well as particular interest area. Now, just like previously, we showed you some sources that had compiled information about resources for businesses, and we've done the same thing here with resources for nonprofits. So the first one I wanted to point out is called GrantStation. GrantStation.com is their address. So it is a business, but they have pretty good information on grants, and they have a searchable database of grants. All these addresses, by the way, will appear later in the presentation, and they're also in our resource list. We also recommend the Community Foundation Public Awareness Initiative. So a number of community foundations from around the country have put this effort together to publicize information, and they have a specific coronavirus relief page, and that's www.commonfoundations.com, and we can see the rest of the link there. Now there's a New York Council of Nonprofits and www.nicon.org, and they have a page of COVID-19 resources, so you can go to New York Council of Nonprofits. There's a company called Instrumental that has also put together a list of COVID-19 related grants at www.instrumental.com, and they also have, well, their focus is nationwide, but they have a search feature that allows you to specify the location you're interested in. Now all these resources are listed in our downloadable grants resource list, so I recommend you go back to our homepage and you can just download it to your computer and have everything at your fingertips. But just in case, I did want to repeat the URLs for the nonprofit resources we just listed. So there was grantstation.com, commonfoundations.com, nicon.org, and instrumental.com. So each of those has some very useful resources for nonprofits to find assistance, especially in the COVID-19 crisis. Now, I don't want to leave out local organizations, although they're a community foundation, so they may be covered in the previous Community Foundations Initiative. I specifically want to point out the Community Foundation of Orange and Sullivan. So they're a useful resource for information and funding related to our local area, but they also have a specific COVID-19 response fund, and so I would recommend taking a look at what they have available. There's one last thing I want to show you before I leave, which is our Grants Resource Guide. The Newburgh Library has a series of subject guides on different topics, including, for example, COVID-19, small businesses, and law, and grants. If you recall the drop-down menu I showed you earlier that had links to the grants resource list and the databases, we've also got a link there for subject guides. So that's where you'd find our various guides, including this one. So in the Grants Resources Guide here, we have links to and information about various aspects of grants and grant seeking. That includes a link to Foundation Directory Online Essential, as well as links to the various government portals that I mentioned earlier, and some other information. Over on the right, we have selected books available at the library. Of course, they're not available right now, but as soon as we reopen, they will be. Our guide has a URL of guides.rcls.org/grants. So guides.rcls.org/grants. So that's one way you can get straight into our grant resources. So I would like to thank you for attending the presentation today, and I hope it's been very useful. And don't forget, you can go to our homepage and download the entire list of grants resources that we've compiled. Thank you, and have a nice day.